Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has publicly acknowledged that he personally urged Ontario Premier Doug Ford not to release an anti-tariff advertisement that ultimately angered U.S. President Donald Trump and triggered a breakdown in trade negotiations between Canada and the United States. Welcome viewers to my channel. Please subscribe, like my video and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. Speaking candidly to reporters following a tense week of diplomacy, Carney revealed that he later apologized to Trump during a dinner meeting at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation (APEC) summit, after learning that the American president was offended by the content of the ad. The controversial television advertisement, funded and approved by Ontario's provincial government, aired across several major U.S. networks during a critical time in trade discussions. It criticized Trump's tariff policies and featured a clip from a 1987 speech by former U.S. President Ronald Reagan warning against the dangers of protectionism and trade wars. While the ad's message aligned with Reagan's own economic philosophy, it was perceived by Trump as a personal attack on his administration's economic agenda. The backlash was swift and severe. Within hours of the ad airing, Trump announced that he was suspending ongoing trade negotiations with Canada and would impose an additional 10% tariff on Canadian imports. The move dealt a significant blow to months of diplomatic efforts aimed at easing tensions and reopening trade channels between the two long-standing allies. When asked how Ford responded to his warning not to proceed with the advertisement, Carney offered a pointed reply. "Well, you saw what came of it. It's not something I would have done," he said, carefully distancing himself from the decision. Ford, a populist conservative who often emphasizes his independence from federal authority, reportedly went ahead with the ad despite Carney's objections. The tension between the two leaders reflects broader political and ideological divisions within Canada. Carney, a liberal and former central banker turned statesman, has taken a pragmatic approach to maintaining diplomatic stability with the United States, emphasizing long-term economic resilience and cooperation. Ford, on the other hand, is known for his combative, populist style and has shown a willingness to directly challenge U.S. policies when he believes Ontario's interests are at stake. Carney made it clear that, as Prime Minister, managing Canada's relationship with the U.S. falls squarely under his authority, not the province's. "I'm the one who is responsible, in my role as Prime Minister, for the relationship with the President of the U.S., and the federal government is responsible for the foreign relationship with the U.S. government," he stated during a press conference marking the end of his 9-day trip to Asia. His remarks seemed intended not only to reaffirm federal responsibility over foreign policy but also to reassert Ottawa's control over international messaging. A spokesperson for Premier Ford did not immediately comment on whether Carney had directly asked him not to air the ad. However, Ford previously claimed that both Carney and his chief of staff had seen the ad before its release, suggesting that the Prime Minister's office was at least aware of its content. Ford eventually decided to pull the advertisement last Monday, but not before it aired during the first 2 games of the World Series, ensuring it reached millions of American viewers. The timing, coinciding with one of the most watched television events of the year, likely amplified its impact and the subsequent outrage from the White House. Trump publicly denounced the ad, saying it distorted Reagan's legacy and misrepresented his views on trade. While Reagan indeed criticized protectionism, his administration also selectively used tariffs as leverage, a nuance Trump's team argued was ignored by the ad's producers. Trump further accused the Ford government of trying to influence public opinion in the United States ahead of a pending Supreme Court case that could determine whether the president possesses the legal authority to unilaterally impose tariffs on national security grounds. Lower courts had previously ruled that Trump exceeded his powers, and the case has become a focal point of debate over presidential economic authority. The episode could not have come at a worse time for Carney, who had only recently met with Trump at the White House to discuss possible compromises on existing tariffs affecting Canada's steel, aluminum, and automotive sectors. Those industries form the backbone of Canada's export economy, and the trade barriers have caused significant strain on businesses and workers on both sides of the border. More than 75% of Canadian exports are destined for the United States, with an estimated 3.6 billion Canadian dollars, 2.7 billion United States dollars, worth of goods and services crossing the border every day. The deep economic interdependence between the two countries means that even short-lived disputes can have wide-reaching effects on manufacturing, supply chains, and consumer prices. Carney's challenge now lies in stabilizing that relationship while also steering Canada toward greater economic independence. He acknowledged that the recent turmoil underscores the urgent need for Canada to diversify its trade partnerships and reduce reliance on a single foreign market. Canada has to transform away from dependence on a single trade partner, he said, previewing a more ambitious agenda he plans to unveil in the upcoming federal budget on November 4. The forthcoming budget, according to officials close to the Prime Minister, is expected to include measures aimed at supporting Canadian industries affected by U.S. tariffs, expanding trade with Asian and European markets, and investing in innovation and green technology to strengthen the country's long-term competitiveness. Carney, who built his reputation as a steady hand during financial crises, has framed the shift as a necessary evolution rather than a retreat from the U.S. partnership. In one of his more candid remarks during the press conference, Carney alluded to the futility of fixating on Trump's often volatile public statements and social media posts. "We can spend our time watching Truth Social," he said, referring to Trump's social media platform. "Or we can focus on what we can control." For Carney, that means keeping Canada's economy steady in the face of political storms both at home and abroad. Yet the episode has left an unmistakable mark on his leadership, highlighting the fragile balance between diplomacy and domestic politics in a globalized world. The incident also exposes a deepening tension within Canada's own political landscape, between the assertive nationalism of provincial leaders like Ford and the cautious diplomacy of a prime minister trying to preserve Canada's most important international alliance. As Carney prepares for his next meeting with U.S. officials, the shadow of the ill-fated ad still lingers over the table. Whether his apology to Trump can repair the damage or whether the episode will mark a deeper rift in Canada-U.S. relations remains to be seen. What is clear is that one advertisement, intended to defend Canada's economic interests, has instead become a diplomatic flashpoint, reminding both nations just how delicate their partnership truly is. It began with a single advertisement, a brief, 2-minute television spot that would set off a chain reaction neither Ottawa nor Washington saw coming. In the world of international politics, words and images have always carried enormous weight, but in this case, a 30-second clip featuring the voice of a long-dead U.S. president managed to shake one of the world's most important trade relationships to its core. The ad, aired by Ontario's provincial government in the United States, was meant to be a statement of defiance, a symbolic pushback against American tariffs that had been crippling Canadian industries for months. But instead, it sparked outrage in the White House, drew the fury of President Donald Trump, and brought delicate trade talks crashing to a halt. For Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, the fallout was both political and personal. In the span of a few days, the quiet progress he had made in rebuilding trust with Washington was suddenly erased. The fragile dialogue that had taken months of diplomacy unraveled overnight, replaced by threats, accusations, and a public relations storm that left his government scrambling to contain the damage. It was not a crisis of his making, yet it became one he would have to own. And in a twist that revealed the complexity of Canadian politics, the culprit was not a foreign adversary or a rival government, it was a provincial premier from within his own country. The advertisement itself was a sleek, emotionally charged piece of political theater. Over a montage of workers, factories, and trucks crossing the border, the words of former U.S. President Ronald Reagan echoed across the screen: "When you shut out imports, you hurt the consumer and you hurt the worker." It was a direct reference to Reagan's 1987 speech condemning protectionist trade policies, a message meant to highlight the dangers of economic nationalism. For Premier Doug Ford of Ontario, the ad was a clever way to appeal to both patriotism and pragmatism, a reminder that even one of America's most conservative icons had opposed the kind of tariffs Trump was imposing on Canada. But for Trump, it was a personal insult. He saw it not as an appeal to shared values, but as an attack on his presidency, his authority, and his economic vision for America. Within hours of the ad's broadcast during a World Series game, Trump took to social media and then to the press. His response was characteristically swift and explosive. He accused Canada of meddling in U.S. affairs, suspended all ongoing trade discussions, and threatened to increase tariffs on Canadian imports by an additional 10%. The shockwave hit Ottawa like a thunderclap. Months of careful negotiation, including face-to-face meetings between Carney and Trump, were suddenly undone. What had been a narrow path toward easing trade tensions was now blocked by political anger and public humiliation.